On the phone it is. Can you see me? Hear me? Everything?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can see you. I just
Cool.
exited out your other one.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that. Don't have an answer for this.
That's all right.
Okay.
Yeah, I normally don't have a mustache. I just finished restoring a 1984 Schwinn Traveler steel road bike. So I'm gonna race it this month, and I'm like, well, if I've got an 80s bike, I might as well go all 80s. I grew the mustache. I'm gonna wear the aviators, the headband.
Yeah.
And race on the
Liked
Speedo. So I got a banana Speedo that's here.
Oh my gosh, that's everything. Go big or go home. I love it.
Yeah, I know. So
Fantastic.
how are you doing? You said you're injured now?
Matter of speaking, this is perfect for an interview. I was at the end of June, I was rescuing baby ducks that fell down a storm drain in front of our office. There was like, I know, it's crazy, right? Pulled up to the office, and there were like 10 people in the parking lot blocking this section, which is directly in front of my office. And I was like, oh, how cute is this? There's ducks, whatever. And then it's like famous last words. Someone asked, hey, can you help me lift this storm grate? It looks like 2 of the ducklings fell. And, you know, those things are like 100+ pounds. And I look around, and the other people that are looking to help are like literally on canes and wheelchairs. And I'm like, okay, I'm the only able-bodied person here. So I helped her lift it and got down into the storm grate. Was down there for about 20 minutes, you know, lifting ducks out of this thing. And then my office manager is like, you have patients in office. Like, you need to get out of the hole. And as I was getting out, you know, I was careful, but I barely clipped the back of my head on the storm grate as I was coming out. So, yeah, it's actually one of the more serious injuries that I've gotten. I had concussion, had that before. Tore a ligament in my neck. I had a massive C6 herniation, still kind of dealing with. So I don't have like pain going into my arm, but I do have a lot of weakness. So through all of this, thankfully, I absolutely swear by cold laser. I have low-level laser technology in the office, and I was supposed to be in a neck brace for 3 to 4 months. And clearly I'm not in a brace, and I'm able to move my head and everything. And so using that laser 4 times a day, I healed that ligament in 3 weeks. So I was able to go back to work, at least on a part-time basis, working with my head trauma patients. So that it's not nowhere near as physical, because I couldn't still really use my right arm at the time. But yeah, it's gotten significantly better, and I've been back in office for a good bit now. I have an associate who helps me out with adjusting since I'm still a little bit limited. But again, grateful for all these different aspects of the practice so that I can continue to work and help people, and not be stuck relying on disability. So
tell me more about this laser. I mean, it's what all does it do other than, you know, help heal neck ligaments? I've never heard of anything like this before.
Yeah. So I have technology in the office. The product line is called Urconia. Urconia actually came up with this cold laser technology. They hold 18 of the 21 patents for any laser that exists. And what it does, you're working the color spectrum. So people are starting to become more familiar with like red light therapy, but this is a step further. This is an actual laser. So instead of like, if you like turn on a light in a room, you know, there's light that spreads everywhere and fills the whole room, versus a flashlight that's a dedicated beam. It increases blood flow, increases collagen formation, hence the ligament. Increases oxygenation in the tissues. It's my main monotherapy that I use for rehabilitating head trauma, because it also does a lot of fancy things in the brain that helps the neurons communicate and reconnect and form stronger pathways so that, you know, you can heal. So, but yeah, it's pretty spectacular. I mean, it's a laundry list of things that it does. This particular one that I have also has a violet laser. And violet laser has a different application. Some people are familiar with it with like, if you have like toe fungus, you have to go to a dermatologist, or you've got, really bad acne, it'll clear that. So it really, violet lasers have a big immune modulating component to them. So even for COVID, actually, there's studies that were released, I think it was back in January this year, that it's effective for mild to moderate COVID. So you can even use it for lasering your lungs, which I've been doing daily with myself and with my patients, dealing with all the smoke from the Caldor fire. That is like practically in our backyard. So it's less than 20 miles away. It's crazy. So we've been really hard hit with smoke. And so in that case, again, increasing oxygenation and helping so that the lungs are less likely to have scar tissue. So it's pretty awesome. This thing does everything.
How does this laser penetrate the skull? I mean, how does that, I don't know how that works.
Yeah. So again, it versus like an LED or infrared or something like that. It's a focus beam. So just like X-rays can go through, this laser can go through. Additionally, every cell in our body responds to sunlight, right? Like, so just like how plants make photos, they have photosynthesis when exposed to light. We're actually really similar to that. It drives a lot of our processes, like helps us make vitamin D. There's a lot of different things that happen. And so since our whole body is chromophores, chrome, color, light spectrum, every cell in our body responds to it. So that's how it works. It's a little bit different than something that it's not like a regular light. Like that makes sense. You shine a light on someone's head, it's not going to go through the skull, but this is a laser. So that is called photon energy is going to go through just about anything. So.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
I actually don't know a lot about red light therapy. My neurologist here in Atlanta had me do blue light therapy to help me with my sleep. And I stopped doing that because it just was so much work, because like you had to do it before 10 a.m. and do all this stuff. Like, I don't really have time to do this.
Yeah. So this is different than just light therapy. This is an actual laser.
Okay.
So it is programmed, instead of light covers like a good bit of the spectrum, or even if you're doing blue, they have very, very specific wavelengths that it's programmed to. And the different frequencies, the different parts of the body are going to respond in a different way. So there's actually, I'm not really the best with dates and time period, but I want to say it was about 7 years ago that there is a doctor who won the Nobel Prize in medicine because he found that every organ in the body vibrates at a different frequency, wavelength. So that's, yeah.
I didn't know organs vibrated.
Yeah, we're made up of atoms. There's constant energy that's occurring, whether it's built up stored energy or you release that, like, with our muscles, the way that our body is designed biomechanically is to produce force. And so when you release that force, that kinetic energy is what allows you, propels you forward, whether it's on a bike or whatever. So we're constantly in a state of there's stored energy. There's so we're energy.
So the organs vibrating are tied to your nervous system and electrical impulses then?
Yeah, literally our entire body receives all of its communication from the nervous system. So organs aren't like, you have to have a signal that tells the intestinal muscles to contract so that we can get toxins out. There's a natural rhythm to the heart. There's a big contribution to that. Again, all of that's from the brain, right? So everything in the body is controlled by the brain. There's a neural impulse, and if you didn't have a brain, the rest of the body isn't going to function because it needs to know timing and sequencing and all these different things. So yeah, it's all connected.
So tell me more about functional neurology, because I haven't seen a functional neurologist. I just went and saw a regular neurologist. So I don't really understand how that actually works.
Yeah. So medical neurologists, so they're designed to, you know, diagnose and treat obviously like neurological conditions and things that are outside of normal parameters. So you'll use advanced imaging to see, you know, is there actual structural damage? What you don't see are functional impairments. Okay, now there's other ways that you can see that someone's having a problem neurologically, but that is where you're getting into what's called applied clinical neuroscience. So we're taking information that we know that's research based, out of Harvard, out of Stanford, out of Cambridge. The father of functional neurology, Ted Carrick, is actually he does all of his research. He's a fellow of Cambridge. Like, it doesn't get much better than that. But you're taking neuroanatomy, neuroimmunology, so the locations of the brain, the blood flow to the brain, the connectivity through different pathways. You have to know how everything goes together to then make a chemical change that can be a lasting change when it's stimulated through all these different means. So functional neurology is, again, taking this information and putting it into a practical application, given what those functional impairments are. So, for example, I do a lot of traumatic brain injury work. So there's papers even in the last year where they've come out and stated that to truly heal post-concussive syndrome, you can't just look at the brain, you have to look downstream. You have to look to the gut. There's something called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary axis. And the brain serves as this hub to then communicate with all the different parts of our body. So these different axes, if you will, you're going into the heart. Again, like I said, like for rhythm, you're going and connecting the gut. As far as the enteric nervous system that's there, you've got to be able to address everything. So the role of like microbiome work and doing gut work to affect the brain and vice versa. You are using like balance therapies with kind of almost more traditional either physical therapy applications. And then if you know the region of the brain that's been functionally impaired, there's all these, everything is connected. So there's all these different ways in, and the beauty of this type of work is knowing how to layer these treatments, knowing the connections between everything so that you can make a physical change. So it really is, you're taking neurology and in all these fields and putting them into a practical application. And what we're finding is that I mean, you can affect literally everything. There's a lot of, even like Dr. Amen, for example, there's a lot of doctors that are stating that a lot of psychological conditions are actually physiologically based. So patients that get, labeled as ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, it may just be an issue where there's a part of their brain that just never really developed correctly. And so there's going to be a weak link as you go into adulthood. I see patients that, for example, extremely artistic individuals, and then if they have a stroke, and the most common location is going to be these like big branches called the middle cerebral artery, and the left side is commonly affected. So you'll have speech and stuff like that. So you can have someone who's actually predisposed to having a weakness in a particular area because it was weak prior to injury, prior to infection, prior to some traumatic event. So then when you put an additional load on it, then there's going to be repercussions locally and then also downstream. And so as a functional neurology practitioner, you've got to be able to know and almost predict where these other downstream areas are so you can address all that as a whole. Brain has better information to work with. You get a better motor command coming out. So the explanation of this is definitely not simple. And but it really is, I think it's kind of the truest sense of taking the body and addressing everything, the psychosocial, psychological, inflammatory responses, all those things, and then seeing how that manifests in that particular individual. Genetics are going to play a role in that too, but it's a smaller.
I've found that, I mean, I've had pre-existing conditions with the ADHD and the bipolar that like the bipolar kind of got it set into a tailspin after the accident because, you know, my brain was like like being a scrambled egg, you know. For the most part, I've always said that, you know, when I got my TBI, it was like somebody shipped a snow globe, you know, and no matter, it takes a while to settle and it never settles in the same place. So, I mean, there are still some issues that were never resolved with mine, and I guess they're going to be permanent. My balance is one. Funny story, I went on a date with this girl that I was seeing for the beginning of summer, and we went paddleboarding, and I had never been paddleboarding, and I learned that I can't really paddleboard anymore because I couldn't keep my balance and I fell off a couple of times.
So all of that, you can rehab all of that. That's actually what I do.
Okay, well,
yeah, you absolutely can rehab that. So in that situation, with having a concussion, it's not uncommon that there's a disconnect between what the eyes and the inner ear is reflecting. And all of this you can test objectively. You can, like, to the point that's FDA approved devices, it's legit work. So you can see and measure if someone has a balance issue and what your sway pattern is. And literally your sway pattern can actually give a lot of information to a functional neurologist about weaknesses, whether it's inner ear or eyes. So when you're on a non-stable surface like water, you have to rely more on your eyes for balance. So we got to make sure that your eyes are actually working together, because uncommonly they won't be coupled anymore.
Mine don't work in tandem.
Yeah, you can fix that. You can fix that. There's exercises for that.
I did physical therapy and things got a little bit better, but it reached a point where they weren't getting any better after that.
Okay. And that's not uncommon, because even then, you know, when you're dealing with a pay for play medical world, it has to be standardized. Okay. So there has to be a standard of care. There has to be a protocol, because then you have to be able to compare it to, if a doctor isn't doing something like, oh, that's outside of protocol. This is for the very reason why I am a cash practitioner and I do not accept any insurance of any kind, because they will determine the care plan for that individual. I have patients that come to me and did 6 months of vestibular therapy, and they did a great job with a vestibular PT, like, you know, out here, Western Health Advantage, but, you know, any one of those, right? Contracted. And she got her eyes so that her eyes were moving well together. But the thing is that after having head trauma, it's hard to handle different stimuli, whether it's light, sound, touch. I mean, even gravity in a weird way, right? So, because there's sensors for all this stuff, right? Even in your inner ear, some people like can't handle doing escalators or elevators or something after a concussion, and causes anxiety. And people are like, well, I think I'm just now afraid of those things. No, you're getting overstimulated from that stimulation that you can't handle. So when you went on that paddleboard, and we know that the eyes aren't working together, and they're likely also not relaying proper information. You may have an overactive canal or an underactive canal in the inner ear. You put those together and you go on a paddleboard. It's just too much. It's like expecting someone who's only run a 5K to go out and run a half marathon. I mean, you're not going to feel so hot after it. So you got to do baby steps. And so there is a very specific way that's individualized to you and to every individual that presents with a post-concussive problem. You got to do baby steps. So maybe we just got to start with getting your eyes to relay, or we got to work on, you know, little baby information coming into the inner ear so that you can start to get used to, you know, side to side motion, because we don't know which part of that experience bothered you. All we know is that you had a hard time with your balance.
Yeah, and I did vision therapy with an ophthalmologist that specializes with people with brain injuries. And my eyes started to work in tandem again. Like it got a lot better, but it was reaching a point where it wasn't making any more improvement. But we did find that during it that I have an issue with colors. I happened to be one day working, I use Photoshop on a regular basis. So I'm going to try to explain this to someone who doesn't use Photoshop as best I can. I was working with an image that I was in Tampa. I was looking at a blue ocean and a blue sky. So it's a lot of blue. And I'm adjusting the color balances. I'm like, okay, I think this looks right. And when I went to, I desaturated it, which means you strip out all the color and you put it in grayscale. And I saw that it was a lot of dark black. And what that told me is I have an issue with kind of figuring out if colors are too rich or too, I guess, I can't think of the other word I would use. But I can't tell that unless I desaturate the image to where it's black and white and I could see, wow, this is really dark. That means there's so much color there, you can't tell. And, you know, it made sense. The company I was working with, or firm I was working with after I got hit, you know, the owner was like, these renderings look like shit. You know, I need you to do these again. I'm thinking to myself, you know, I think these look fine. And to me, they did look fine. However, to people with normal vision, they were way off. Right. So, and that went on for 3 years before we even figured it out, you know?
So that's not uncommon. So you lost your contrast sensitivity. And there's, again, it's not really like one specific part of the brain that relays this, but there's a combination of two really. So you got your occipital lobe, which has a lot, of course, you hear probably a lot that has to do with like vision, but it's vision is like the entire brain. It's not just one region. But the concept of, you know, of art, big ideas, all that is very right parietal lobe based. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there were other things that we found that has to do with the same region of the brain that would be a deficit. And there are specific exercises for that as well. So for example, so I have a patient who, she didn't realize this. So she, you know, had a concussion, very, you know, light sensitive, even color sensitive. So color, especially on, you know, one end versus another, can be very stimulating, especially bright colors. There's a reason why stoplights are the colors that they are. But with this individual, she didn't realize that because of she had all these injuries throughout her lifetime on one specific side of her body. Your right parietal lobe, regardless of the side, that's where information regarding like joint position goes to. Well, guess what? That also has a huge tie-in with 3D awareness, spatial awareness, and pretty much anything that you would think of as far as art. So a recognition of color. I know that when I first had head trauma, I had what's considered a moderate head trauma because I was unconscious for 15 to 20 minutes. They rate it based on how, it's like Glasgow Coma scale, how long you've been unconscious. It's not just symptoms. It's more like what actually occurred at the time. I would get really confused trying to drive. It was like all of a sudden I was really doubting myself if that was really red or green. And at that point I was essentially seeing in grayscale because I couldn't handle the stimulation of bright colors. So I knew that I'm like, okay, I can't be on the road right now. And I didn't drive again for 6 months until I was able to get those abilities back. And then I'm like, okay, that really is a green light. That means I can't go. It's an interpretation of color as well. So I know it's probably a really strange experience, especially for someone who does the work that you do, but you can improve upon all of that.
Yeah, I never had trouble with traffic lights.
I'll just give you an example of color, of the interpretation of color, being able to understand and recognize color. I just gave an example of it's essentially the same part of the brain. So
yeah, and the other things like depth perception I don't know how off it still is. It's gotten better. But that was one. And what was the other thing with my eyes? Obviously, I don't remember things very well. Let's see. Oh, I have a blind spot like in this quadrant, we'll call it, of my right eye.
So same situation. So you look at, why do you have a blind spot? Is it a blind spot because your eye physically can't come in? There are different areas of our field of view that is, again, dictated by different parts of the brain. Okay, so you're able to, again, you can test for all this stuff and then see exactly what the problem is, but it's not uncommon that you'll lose your angular vision going like, down and out type of thing. Definitely not uncommon. There can also be, so any of with the intrinsic muscles that go in, but you'll commonly have a paradoxical where like you can't get the other eye to go up and out. And again, all these specifics can be rehabilitated. And if you just said you had a blind spot, it means likely the eye is not able to move to that location. That by itself explains your depth perception issues.
Okay. Now, how does sense of humor tie into all this? Because mine's gotten better, but it's still warped considering if you go back to what it was pre-accident. And I had a special brand of humor as it is. Certain people, you had to like me as a person to really like my sense of humor. But yeah, it's a little bit warped to where, my perception of the ability to read the room was off. Now, like if I tell a joke, I can read the room, be like, "Ooh, that didn't go over well." But before, I couldn't tell that. Like, what happened? So I have a somewhat realization of when I said something somewhat awkward that was only funny to me, but before I didn't even have that.
Got it. So the ability to have complex emotions is actually very executive function frontal lobe. And to be able to distinguish between what's appropriate and what's not, that's a higher learning type of thing. So our frontal lobes, which again, that's like what makes us human and gives us the ability to have abstract thought and do sequencing tasks and stuff like that. But specific one side versus another, if you've got a weakness in that area, so again, not really in the labels, but ADD, ADHD, OCD, any of those, or I mean, even so, I've had patients that were diagnosed as atypical bipolar. It wasn't bipolar at all. Actually, it was again a physiological deficit and imbalance that just needed to be corrected. And guess what? I see motor tics go away. I see all sorts of things go away. So you can have a flat affect, as they call it in the beginning. If you really lose one of the frontal lobes from having a weakness with one of those preconditions, if you will. But the cerebellum, the part that really gets affected with head trauma simply due to its location, whether it's whiplash or anything like that, the cerebellum and the frontal lobes, they share a blood supply. And so with head trauma, it's not uncommon that you can go one of different directions. There can be, right, either a loss of sense of humor. You have people that will say things that will be just super inappropriate. We have a patient that comes into our office and shares some of the worst videos, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's like Springer, and I mean, it's funny. Like he's funny to a sense, but doesn't understand what's inappropriate because he literally lost that part. And in his case, this is a really severe case. I'm not 100% sure if he's going to get that part back. But it really is, you got to make sure frontal lobe's working on both sides. And for those to work correctly, you've got to make sure that the cerebellum is doing well. Otherwise, that blood flow is going to be affected. It's just not going to be working as well. So in that case, you can ironically do things that typically you wouldn't want to think about doing with a balance issue. So like trampolining, being on a swing, all these are all forms of vestibular stimulations, which vestibular is, it's not just balance, it's also, it's our eyes, our inner ear, it's the brain, the integrating center that takes all this information. That integrating center, by the way, cerebellum, coordinates all this stuff. And everything's working together, then it's great. If not, it's gonna show up in some relatively predictable ways, and that's not uncommon. That should continue to get better for you. But even then, if you do frontal lobe activities, you want to make sure your eyes can move vertically. That's a big one too, that has a role with this. There's a lot of things that you can check for, and ways to rehabilitate. So we can discuss this later if you'd like.
Oh, I don't mind it. Yeah, I'm good with whatever. I'm an open book at this point. My lawsuit's over, so I can share whatever I want.
Good for you. Okay, sweet. So yeah, there's, like I said, there's a lot of continued work that you can still do. And most of that's going to be frontal lobe, and you'll see a lot of things come back prior to. It does take some time. So, and everyone's a little bit different. No head trauma is the same. They're all different. So.
Yeah. And I mean, what I've found is, at least for the first few years before I started showing any progress, me and my ex, it was like we spoke different languages. You know, I couldn't speak hers. She couldn't speak mine, which is kind of the reason why I was writing the book that I wrote. And it's kind of a way that I can't have a conversation with most people without forgetting stuff, being unorganized. It's just not that coherent. But when I write very well, and I write very detailed. So it's like a Rosetta Stone. I can hand you this book and you can look at it and like, oh, this is what was running through his head. This is, it all makes sense now. But I could never put that in an actual conversation. She also had a nasty habit of dropping a shitload of information on me at one time, which I could not process. So that didn't help either. But yeah, so that's what the book was for. And, people have read it before and they're like, this is very detailed. And it's like, this is, I wanted this to be a way, if I can't speak your language, then you can speak mine, Right.
I think, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant what you've done, because it's so true. It's the injury that you can't see. And unless you've actually experienced it firsthand, most people aren't going to really understand. So I think it's brilliant that you did that.
Yeah. And, the other thing is, because you can't see it, people have problems empathizing with it. My dad, I love my dad, but he doesn't get it. My mom is a nurse, so we work very well with this, and she would have been a great help if she didn't live 4 states away. So there was that. But for the most part, she was kind of helped me pull the strings while I was going to see this doctor, that doctor, between that and my lawyer getting me into places. So yeah, decided to pay a visit. But my dad, he just, I don't know if he thinks that I'm faking it or if he just doesn't understand it, but he just doesn't understand it, I guess, and that's what happens with a lot of people.
It does. And that's why I've made it a point to, in my practice, have the most evidence-based objective practice that you can, because there are ways that you can show, hey, look, this is recording my eyes in real time. This is what they're doing, looking straight across. I think they're doing this. They're not. When you can see something like that and you share that with someone, it's like, look, it's almost something I told you so. And it can be really healing. But there are absolutely ways that you can show that. And oftentimes there are a lot of people that are, they live their life by sight, not by faith. So having this technology and being able to quantify that for someone is everything.
Yeah. And with the neuropsych testing, I could show them like, look, you see all this red here with these zeros, that means I'm doing bad. But I don't think he still would get it. My mom gets it. She's like, she reads the results and she's like, oh, wow. So, yeah. But, you don't, sometimes you just don't get empathy for a lot of people. And empathy is different from pity. I'm not looking for pity, but
Oh yeah.
yeah. And some people, they give you pity instead. But, you know, it's just, unless you've either had one or you've taken care of someone or you somehow are related someone with one, you just don't understand how TBIs are.
Yep, that's true. So that's it. In my field, it's important, and in this region, that people know that there are ways to show that there is something objective going on, so that it minimizes that. The interpersonal strife that happens after head trauma is one that just doesn't get talked about at all. I actually, I mean, my ex-husband actually left me during the time that I had head trauma. He couldn't handle it. He didn't understand a lot of things. And then he was like, wow, he's like, I'm sorry, it's just too much for me. And at that time, I was going the medical route, and, you know, it had MRIs and was with the best vestibular medical practitioner in the South, which was actually kind of a joke. Didn't really see much benefit from that at all. It wasn't until I was able to eliminate and rule out all of these other potential medical causative factors to what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, that I was able to, like, okay, this is going to be a chiropractic thing, i.e. it's going to be integrative. It's not going to be totally straightforward. And that's when I started to see a lot of change. Because like I said, like, I couldn't drive. I couldn't really do anything for 6 months. And I'm 8 years out. I had head trauma October 2nd of 2013. And I mean, I can honestly say it's the first 3-4 years still had a lot of symptoms. So, but once we knew, you know, again, had to address, like, for me, I had lived in Costa Rica. So there was another factor that was there. I had chronic GI issues because I had pesticide poisoning living there. And so, like, that has to be addressed. So, and it actually wasn't until that was addressed that I started making really big changes. And that's when I was actually able to start to participate in triathlon. And you know, I love being around athletes. I've been an athlete for most of my life, but I felt like that was a part of my identity that had to go away, in a sense. So then it was like, to stay close to that, then I'm the doctor to the ones that can do, right? You can't do it, you teach. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but it really, like, addressing that made a huge difference. But even then, it wasn't until I had, you know, actual paperwork that showed, you have pesticide poisoning, you have this. I was like, hey, this is why this hasn't healed, why it's taken so long. And it was something else tangible that I could, you know, give to people around me that, like, look, that this is real, and I've really been dealing with this. And yeah, I think it's gotten a lot better. And I mean, in the last 5 years, especially with acknowledgement of CTE, I mean, NFL did a huge part in recognizing that, so that other people can understand and get exposed to at least concussion a little bit. But I feel like a lot has changed, and I think it's continuing to change too, especially as we recognize that, one, it's not just that, like, your brain's like hitting the cranial vault and you're jacked up from that. There's immune changes that happen in the brain. The brain has its own immune system separate from the rest of the body. When you smack your head, your blood-brain barrier opens within 6 hours. We've known this for like 10 years now. This isn't even like new information. And so when that happens, you change the brain's immune system, and you also change the immune system in your gut, because the same proteins that form the blood-brain barrier also make up the gut barrier. So it's not uncommon that during that time, people develop food allergies. There's all sorts of different things that can happen, and it's just not considered. But it's important, because if you look at vertigo, if you look at all these, you know, balance disorders, there are 3 main ways to make a difference in the system medically. And one of them you're probably familiar with. They use like meclizine. or like Dramamine. All those ene ending drugs are antihistamines. Histamine affects the balance centers. There's also a reason why people with COVID are having problems with balance, and it's related to this very thing. So you want to look at what are your histamine loads like. So now we're getting in more into like integrative medicine, but it's important. So everyone's a little bit different. So for some people, when they have head trauma, they're then sensitive to caffeine afterward, and their circadian rhythms are all off. You can fix all that stuff. Chronic gut issues or malabsorption problems. People will develop nutritional deficiencies, which is a pretty big deal right now. You want to make sure that your immune system has everything that it needs to act normally and not overreact. That's also relevant for vaccines. There's a lot that really can be done after the fact, just in a different light. And I know me personally, I had to, like I said, I had to rule out all these other things to find that, and then realize that there was value in learning this information. So I used my own injury to start my postgraduate training so that I could truly help other people, because there's way too many people that are walking around absolutely suffering, and they don't need to suffer. There's options, you just haven't been exposed to it.
The changes in the gut, does that have to do with anything with why I go through phases where I crave sugary things like candy? Sometimes I just even want sugar, I don't know if I found that, but it goes in waves, it's never a consistent thing.
Right. Yes. One of the things that happens after head trauma is that we'll develop blood sugar imbalances. So, so I'm like, I know this one. I was like, when I was saving the baby birds and all that stuff, that's the one thing that did kind of come back. So I did get hypoglycemia. I didn't have that for like 10 years. The blood sugar dysregulation is real. And so that can affect energy levels after you eat. You can feel like you're falling asleep, or you get the hangry, right? It'll affect sleep quality. It'll affect a lot of things. And so when you crave sugar, that's your body saying, hey, I need energy and I need it like now. And so insulin's not going to be as receptive as it has been. Now, being an athlete that you've been, like, that's helped a lot, but typically you've trained your body to run off of fat for fuel, and not just carbohydrates. And ultimately that's what's going to need to happen. But in this time period, doing small meals every 3-4 hours is going to be really helpful. And you'll find that they're actually, it's not without rhyme or reason as much as you think that it is. Long days on the computer, you have deadlines, stress, all that stuff is absolutely going to influence you. So, especially if you look at like the day prior, right? I mean, carb cycling, all that information is going to be relevant for this time right now too. So, things that can help will be like, eat like half of an avocado or something before bed the night before, so that you have a steady drip throughout the night. And so that when you wake up in the morning, you're not like crashing, and then you'll eat, cause then it's cyclical. You'll like go to crash. You're like, I need sugar. And then you have that sugar, but then you just jacked your insulin through the roof, which it's like, thank you for that. And the cells are like, thank you for that. But the faster it rises, you get a bigger crash. And reactive hypoglycemia is super common. So paying attention to making sure you're getting enough healthy fat, probably more than you've been used to as an athlete, is really important, to help, have like a more even sugar drip, if you will. But also from a brain standpoint, because when you have those big insulin, peaks and valleys, that's also very inflammatory for the brain. So doing high dose fish oils and making sure that you have a kind of a higher fat diet that's healthy fat tends to help with that a lot.
So you're saying like eating salmon on a regular basis would probably be a good thing for me?
Yes.
Or just fish oil supplements?
Yeah. So because you have to be careful with couple things. One is going back to the food sensitivity argument. If you have a leaky gut and you don't know it because your barriers are open, then food is essentially falling out of your gut and into the bloodstream where it doesn't belong. And if it doesn't belong in the bloodstream, there's going to be an immune response. And so food rotation schedules are really important so that you're not eating the same thing every day. It's salmon. It's not easy to get it truly wild caught unless it's different where you live. There's a lot that happens to salmon. So salmon's fantastic. Just make sure that, you can do fish like 3 or 4 times a week, just alter the sources. But honestly, like a serving of salmon, you're probably going to get about 3 to 4 grams of fish oil. You need to be at 9 to 12 grams of fish oil a day to help mitigate that inflammatory process that occurs in the brain for at least a couple months. So that can be hard to consume. So I do suggest supplementing it. Additionally, a lot of people will find post-head trauma that their digestion is impacted. And so you may not be able to digest fat as well as previously before. So that would still go for healthy fat too. So you take enzymes to help you break down your food. Hydrochloric acid tends to dry up during this time as well. So taking a supplement like B18HCl, as long as that's appropriate for you, is really good. But yeah, you have to get up into those higher realms to support your body what it needs for inflammation. So I think you kind of have to supplement to some degree.
So with all the rehab that you can do to rehab a brain injury, once you I'm going to try to figure out how to say this. Once you reach a level of what you would consider mostly, or if not fully recovered, do you have to maintain doing all these exercises and things like that? Or once you reach that point, I don't have to do anymore?
It's a great question. So when you're doing this style of work, there's always your starting point, right? And your starting point is going to have exercises that it's like when you're trying to have, like you're returning to sport, like someone wants to return back to running, right? They got to start and say they have a really bad sprained ankle. You got to get all these little nuances of strength and flexibility and things back so that you're then able to have a normal gait when you do go out and do, a 5K or whatever, right? Same thing needs to be said with the brain. So wherever your starting point is right now, which I know that you're having problems with balance. So I know that where you're at right now, the exercises are going to be different and they're more tiny nuance than they are down the road. Down the road, as long as again, everyone's different. The particular weaknesses that you presented with, as long as they were not weaknesses that you've had pretty much your entire life, you would expect to see a pretty good recovery. But again, this is really generalities, because like I said, every head trauma is different. But those exercises should definitely be different, and it should be more of a global approach versus teeny tiny, let's figure out how to get peroneal muscles in the ankle to strengthen up so that then like you're not working on individual little things. You're just going out and like, hey, make sure that you stay physically active, right? It's like you're physically active, you get deconditioned. It's not like you just like stay physically active. There is a part of deconditioning that can occur. So when you get to a certain point with head trauma work, you would likely need to keep some sort of functional training, balance approach, whether it's, once a week, twice a week, something like that. Once you get to that point, to make sure that you're giving the brain the information that it needs, because if you had a functional deficit in that area at one point, in the future, it's still going to be your weakest link. And if something else happens, again, another accident, trauma, infection, even an emotional trauma, people don't talk about that enough. Emotional trauma is literally the exact same thing as a physical trauma, chemically, or it can be. So as long as all things being equal, there should be some modicum of of exercises that are done on a regular basis that's tailored that would likely have to be done. But it's like, oh, I'm getting back into shape. What, you mean I'm going to have to go to the gym again? Yeah, you're going to have to go to the gym again. So, but not to the degree where you're doing exercises twice a day, every day, little, nuanced things to try and get your eyes back and stuff like that. There'll be something, but something that it'll actually just be generally more fun. You won't have to do something like I said, really tiny.
Yeah. Speaking of emotional trauma, I mean, I'm sure with your ex basically, saying this isn't for me, I didn't want this. My ex did the same thing, only she stuck around for, 2 years. And I feel like if she knew this wasn't for her, she could have, pulled the ripcord much sooner, and I would have been much better off. I actually didn't show any progress until I actually moved out. So
There's something to that.
it's Malcolm X had a good quote. I'm gonna try not to fuck this up. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Right.
So and I had to move out because she owned the house. I sold my condo to move in. So yeah. I've caught a couple lucky breaks. I bought the condo that I'm in now before COVID hit and before the housing prices spiked. So I got lucky there. But it was a lot to deal with someone who's kind of distant from you. And I don't know if you felt this way, but I felt like I was being viewed like I was irreparably damaged goods,
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
And I think that does far more harm than the accident itself, because having a support system is, you're better off having no support system than one that is not an active participant.
Any sort of situation that is not supportive, or at the very least is viewed as that, because perception is reality, it's not conducive to healing. It's just not. So whether it's an abandonment type of thing, or the other end of that would be more of like emotional, verbal abuse, or physical abuse even. But anyway, so anywhere along that continuum has the capacity to increase stress hormones in the system, and depending on your individual makeup, if you're able to handle those or not, it can interfere with the healing process. I didn't recognize the situation that I was in as being emotionally abusive until the functional neurologist I was working with. There's exercises that needed to be done, and I needed help with my exercises. And he asked me, and I was like, I barely remember a lot from this time period. I had some pretty significant amnesia during this time. He said, he's like, do you feel comfortable with your husband doing the exercises with you? And I looked at him, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm in a happy relationship. But he was seeing the disconnect. When you're sick and the focus is very inward, you're not necessarily paying attention to everything that's happening to you outwardly, but it can still have a negative response. So I know for me that once that happened, I mean, it was pretty terrible, because it was a long-standing relationship. We'd been married for almost 12 years. But the idea for him of, because we lived this international life, that it would just, the new life wouldn't be conducive to what he was looking for out of his life. So yeah, so that definitely hurt. And I mean, you definitely, like, I worked through that with therapy for God, at least.
Welcome back, Doc.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
All right. Anyhow, so
we were talking about how it's kind of it felt like abuse, and I didn't realize at the time I was going through it with my ex. I felt alone, abandoned, unwanted, but I didn't understand why someone that I loved was doing that, and my brain couldn't comprehend that. It wasn't till like about 6 months later in therapy that I started to think, well, that was abuse. And I kept asking my therapist, I said, look, you know, am I off base here? Like, is this shifting blame, or was this actually kind of an emotional abuse? I said, I don't want to go like, I don't want to be making excuses. And I was kind of cognizant of what that was. And was this actually abuse? And it feels like it was emotional abuse.
Well, and again, it's like whether it wasn't, it's, again, perception is reality. So if your system perceived it, if you felt that it was a neglectful situation or had a negative impact on you, that can definitely impact your healing. So yeah, so these are just all the things that should be addressed in that process of healing, because you never know which things are going to be a hindrance. So yeah, so I know that therapy for me during that time was extremely helpful so that I can understand, but it was also understanding the fact that, the ramifications. It's like oftentimes what people are afraid of is literally fear itself, and fear of the unknown is a big one. And so when you see someone that has an injury and they're struggling, but yet you can't see any physical signs of that, that is very fear inducing in a lot of people, and people will tend to project out into the future. Well, what does that look like? And how does that affect my life, right? In a month, in a year, whatever. So, I really, this is for a lot of reasons, it's a really passionate area that I like to focus my attention to. And even we're going to be expanding into a new facility, and we have in the building, actually super stoked about this. There is a licensed therapist, and I work with licensed therapists. I work with neuropsychiatrists. Every aspect, you have to address everything that is going to affect a person's ability to heal, and those interpersonal relationships are huge. So doing group therapy for, TBI survivors and including their families in it too, because sometimes it's like you get used to seeing someone in a particular light. So, right, like I'm a 41-year-old doctor, and my father still to this day will say things. I'm like, do you think I'm 14 in your brain still? Like, you know what I mean? So it's like people have their own perceptions of things. And so based upon that, it'll be like their understanding of the situation. And so they'll take, people will take a perception of you, and then whether you realize it's happening or not. Right. And it's like, okay, it's my perception. And based on that perception, then, this is the normal, typical behavior that I normally see with this individual. And when that changes, that can be really scary for people. And I think it is hard to deal with in a relationship as loss of a house, or a big financial change, a job change, or something. It's very taxing to the relationship, because oftentimes the other partner also doesn't know. They just either you don't know their coping skills or their previous experience with any of this. And so there's just so many factors that go in. And if everyone can be on the same page and have a kind of a mutual understanding, like you said, it's a lot better. Of course, it's a lot better to have a supportive community, because then you don't feel so alone and so isolated when the nature of this injury tends to isolate because everything can be overstimulated. And that's right. There's a fine line there between being able to have healthy social relationships and it physically doing you in, because you'll have a hard time whether it's, being and speaking for an extended period of time. I don't know if this was a thing for you, but there are a number of, post-concussive syndrome survivors that have stated they're like, I get really worn out talking on the phone, or I haven't been able to visit with friends like I used to because it just takes too much out, whether it's just, producing your own voice over and over, which actually takes energy. Speakers, singers, all that can relate to that. But it's that physical energy too. So if your energy is not on par with another person, I think we all know someone like this, an energy vampire, something like that, you're going to be even more sensitive to that. And then can continue to either, mirror the other person's, behaviors or anyway, it's obviously complex, and I'm not a therapist, but I do work with a lot of therapists, and it's so much better. The outcomes are better when there's a supportive community, whether it's family, people that we identify as family, it does make a huge difference.
Yeah. And I had that financial hardship type issue. I had to go on disability. I haven't been able to work as an architect. I've tried 4 times, and the last time I quit, but the other 3 I got fired within, the employer I was with when I got hit, they gave me about 10 months, which was far more than I would have given myself if I was them. But that was the longest I had a job that after the accident. The other one was 1 month, another one was 6 months. So I just, it was more like, living in fear was difficult for me because I was always, I knew I wasn't what I used to be. And every day it was wondering, is today going to be the day? Because I got fired on a fucking Monday once. So you really never, it's like, like that shit usually happens on a Friday. I got on a Monday. So I never knew what day it was going to come. And I had to live with that. And then I had to live with, the fear of what was going to happen in my relationship. So it was very crippling to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, when you've already got a brain that's taxed enough with inflammation and it's trying to do its thing and heal, it's going to tend to not, really show up for you in other ways. It's already at max capacity. So you're trying to have it deal with more and just additional loads. Yeah, it can be. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the point where everything kind of imploded is I took the job that I quit. I knew it was a bad fit, and I was traveling. I was living out of Hartsfield, Jackson. I was there once or twice a week, flying everywhere, having to write my reports. At some point, I was working 80 hours a week. And for me, 80 hours is like 60 hours to a normal person. I had to go above and beyond to get all that work done. And I was working 7 days a week. It was well beyond the capacity that I could handle. And it kind of, made me snap to where I had a big disconnect. And then everything kind of, my relationship went down the tubes, and then COVID hit. So it was like a perfect storm that kind of really messed with my brain, but it was also the turning point. And right. I also had a problem with alcohol after the TBI, to where, alcohol is a friend when you need it. But it got to be the point where I was coping with it. So, and then once I quit drinking, things started to get better, and everything started to fall into place, even with COVID and the isolation.
Good. Glad to hear that. There's some positivity that can come out of situations like that. Good for you.
But I found that the extreme isolation of COVID, because I went with living with someone to not seeing anyone in person for other than people in the grocery store for months. I think from March till October is the first time when I saw my therapist in person again. And I, in that time, I didn't have physical contact with another person, not even a fist bump, nothing.
Oh.
Yeah. So it really messed with my recovery in my brain. And, So
Yeah.
it had been a difficult process trying to recover during that. I don't know if you've had that experience with your patients during, in 2020 or not.
In 2020, I was very grateful that, chiropractors have established themselves as primary care physicians. That's actually the training that we have, or as you would call, portal of entry providers. We don't have to have a referral. Any referral that comes is because of a monetary reason, not because there has to be a referral. So that being said, I was pretty much running like an urgent care facility. I had a full lab. We were doing COVID testing March last year because I was like, this is going to be a big issue for a while. And we were slammed. And in the first, I'd say 6 weeks of lockdown, because, California, our lockdown lasted a year. And this is literally Newsom country. We actually, Governor Newsom lives in a community 5 minutes from my office, and El Dorado Hills, all that. So that being said, we took this very seriously. We knew that in our office that we were going to be the only physical contact that a lot of people would have. And I am a true believer in physical contact, and I hug all my patients. That was actually really hard for me for the first 6 weeks, that, as we were trying to flatten the curve, if you will, during that time. And, we were all scared. We didn't really know what we were dealing with until we got more information. But so like when people started to return to hugging again, and they're like, I'm not leaving until I get my hug, we realized how serious it really was. So, and people becoming more depressed. I constantly have people around me. I've never said that, like, I'm so grateful to be a chiropractor, especially during this time, because I was able to go to work. I was able to have physical contact with people. Healing people heals me. And so, I didn't have the experience that most of the world did during that time, because I was working 10, 11 hours a day, and I was just pouring myself into service in the community. And I'm like, we don't keep ourselves healthy, we don't keep our doors open, then all these people are going to suffer. And so it's great. We have, at least right now, returned back to hugging, and we'll see how much longer that lasts. And so we have mask mandates and everything that's supposed to be kicking back in again September 30th. So that was that isolation. Even people that you would say have really good coping skills, have gone through a lot of stuff in their life, were just not equipped to go through this. With the whole much prior to COVID, with having had trauma and not being able to leave my house for 6 months, that was hard, because actually after a certain point, I was like, I almost wondered if I was going to be shut in. I'm like, I was so sensitive to light and sound that I couldn't handle being with other people, and I didn't know really how to manage that. And so I kind of just ended up putting that on the back burner and just continued to focus on my care, and really with the thought that I'm like, I'm going to be an example. I am going to get better, and I'm going to show other people how to do it. So again, it's different. A lot of that was different for me. But that isolation that I experienced, I can't say I was completely isolated, though. I had church. I had other people who were helping me. It's not exactly the same as COVID. You don't see anyone for 6 months, man. That's hard. I really can't imagine that part. So we tried to provide that instead.
Yeah, and I have no idea how I managed to get sober during that time. I picked the worst possible time to stop drinking, right? If I was going to make it the difficulty level of 10, that's what I did, right?
You did.
Yeah.
And that's huge. You deserve.
So if I could do that, then I can make it through anything, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. You could be sober during COVID. Like, no one was sober during COVID.
Yeah, I know.
I really shouldn't joke about that. It's not funny, but seriously, like that's a huge accomplishment. And you absolutely had to do that, because alcohol, you can't have alcohol with having TBI. You just can't. It's the same part of the brain. There's a reason why the field sobriety testing that they do on the side of the road, touch your finger to your nose and do you have balance? Like, can you have coordinated movement? Those are all specific cerebellar tests. They just don't know that, but now you do. And yeah, you can't have alcohol. I was told that gratefully that I couldn't drink, and I didn't drink at all, I think for the first year. Because they said that I would be impacted, and and alcoholism runs my family like severely too. So
yeah, I got
it
you.
hasn't really, yeah. So it's really good that you did that, and so you can't rehab the brain. So if you were still drinking during that time that you were doing rehabilitation, it's not to be derogatory or anything like that, but without a doubt, I guarantee that it was affecting your recovery as well. They don't talk about that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you don't really. I didn't really tell my doctors I was doing that. I kind of left that part out. So
yeah, that's not. Look, that's not you did. It's not like that at all, because you can still, even it was during that time. There's nothing that says that you can't continue to rehab. I've rehabilitated, guys with balance issues where, he's over 80 years old, and a guy had a cochlear implant put in because he was, completely lost hearing, right? Well, your inner ear is kind of important for things other than just hearing. You like the ability to know where you are, like with gravity, right? We've got these 3 canals, and that information tells the brain you are upright, you are laying down, you are on your left side. Your brain can't do that. You're going to feel a certain way about it. Anxiety, depression, whatever. This guy literally came into my office dragging his head against the wall, and he was a surgeon, a retired surgeon, smart guy. And he figured that he's like, well, if I do this, I keep my head in this position, I don't feel like I'm going to fall off the planet. I'm like, that's nuts. What the heck? And so in his case, what happened was that he, so they put this implant in, but after surgery, they got to make sure that, you're good before they quote turn it on. Well, they didn't bother to check the functionality of the other side. And the other side was not doing so hot. So we actually had to rehabilitate the non-surgical side before we could rehabilitate the surgical, the right weaker side. So again, this guy, over 80 years old, how well do you think he's going to be able to recover? You would think that, oh, there's no way. This guy literally at the end of I don't know, I want to say like 3-4 months, he grabbed me and we're dancing together in my hallway. I have it on video, it's cute thing. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what age you are. We just, obviously there's limitations in healing, but you're a young, healthy guy. So you just figure out what the specifics are that has been overlooked, that needs to be addressed to help piece everything back together. So even something is, like I said, something as simple as not having enough hydrochloric acid in your stomach to break down food is like everything, because then you can't feel your body. The reason why most people, die is because of failure of it's an inability for energy production. You can't take your food and turn it into energy in the form of ATP, the common currency that our body uses for everything, for detox, for breathing, like everything, right? So you aren't able to do that, and going into high school chemistry type stuff like Krebs cycle, you can't keep your water wheel going and create energy. You're gonna have a problem. And in every step of that energy production, it requires B vitamins. It requires a lot of different things. And if you've got chronic gut inflammation, guess what? You're not absorbing B vitamins. You're probably not even making them. B12 is made in the gut. Your gut's jacked up. You can't make B12. You need B12 for your brain, for memory. There's people that have been diagnosed as having, early Alzheimer's, and it was simply a B12 deficiency. So that matters. So just knowing if you're deficient in nutrients, important. Knowing if there's a family history of autoimmunity, you get head trauma, you start to develop some interesting symptoms, you should probably start to look into those other things. So, and a functional neurologist can help guide you through. So you're not just spending a ton of money on like, well, let's try this. Let's see what's going on here. No, there are very specific areas that are going to be impacted by the brain communicating to these different organs. And if there's a functional deficit there one way or another, you're going to have symptoms.
Yeah. Well, Doc, I don't want to take up any more of your time. You've been gracious enough to give me some as it is.
No problem. I'm happy to talk about it. Like I said, I'm like, we're both, I'm living proof that you can come back and heal. You're still on your way, but sounds like you've come from a long way already. So
yeah, it's definitely been, it's one of those cliches, what a long, strange trip it's been, right?
Yeah.
It's when the date of the incident, your life was different the day before, and it's never going to be the same after. So.
Can be.
Well,
I know it's hard to see it right now. I understand that.
Well,
it
no, at least for me, it's never going to be the same because it has changed me in ways, and I'd like to think it's for the better. What I'm doing, and honestly, I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with that person. I never thought that that would change, right? So,
yeah,
and I'm getting used to life as just being by myself, and it's a different life. And even though I'm not working as an architect anymore, I am doing stuff and kind of making a difference for other people at least. So it's a different life, and it'll never be the same. Like I said, you shoot the snow globe, the snow will settle, but it's never going to be in the same place.
Right.
So
right.
Thanks again, Doc. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Happy to lend any information, and yeah, you're doing a good thing. Thank you for continuing to do this work and bring awareness.
Yep. Enjoy your week.
Thanks. You too. Bye.